Before we start the video, last video I mentioned that World War II started in 1937 in the video. So after filming that video, I searched up when World War II really started, and Google says it started in September 1st, 1939. I was wrong, so I edited the real date while I was telling what's the real date in the video. And in the last video, I saw a comment, and he said that I mentioned 1937, the start of World War II, even though it's not the start of World War II, but it was the date of the Second Sino-Japanese War. And if you don't know what the Second Sino-Japanese War, this is from Wikipedia, so just search it up. The Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945, was a military conflict that was primarily waged between the Republic of China and the Empire of Japan. So, I'm basically still correct. And the comment in the last video told me I'm correct, even though it's not really the start of World War II. It's, it's 1937, I said 1937, and the real date of the start of World War II is 1939. So I was right. So, and last video I mentioned that I'm going to react to World War I videos, but I kind of forgot about our series in the Pacific War, and this is still episode 0.3, so I have to finish the preload in the Pacific War before we're gonna learn about World War I, because I didn't check the playlist in Kings and Generals channel, so that's the reason why I restarted the series. So yeah, like and subscribe. I'm loving your support, and let's go right to the video. Okay folks, this is going to be episode 0.3 of the Pacific War, and I'm gonna start my recording by my recording has started, and this is Rise of Ultranationalism in Japan. I don't know what ultranationalism means, so we're gonna learn about it in this video. So like and subscribe. The next video, maybe I'm going to react to some Indian content, because it's been a while since we learned about India. I mentioned in my last Indian video that I'm going to learn about India, but kind of forgot about it. So the next video I might learn about India, and the next I'm gonna try to react to Pacific War 0.4. So here we have Rise of Ultranationalism in Japan by Kings and Generals. If you want to see this video, it's in the description down below. Okay, let's go. Hold on a minute, why the hell is it? Man, it's 480p. You know what, let's just go 720p. Okay.
By the start of the 20th century, Japan had turned from a pre-industrialized isolationist state into a modernized regional power, defeating both the Chinese and Russian empires, annexing Korea and Taiwan, and expanding their sphere of influence across East Asia. But after the death of Emperor Meiji, new problems would arise, opportunities would be taken, and Japan would continue to expand and develop itself as a rising great power. Today we're going to continue analyzing the evolution of the Japanese Empire during the Taisho and early Showa eras, covering its role in the Great War, subsequent expansionist developments, and the start of its trajectory towards fascism and the Pacific War. 2021 is coming to an end, and one of the...
Okay. That Andrew Jackson. Okay. I'm gonna skip the ad. I'm very, very sorry, because it would take a little bit while
to try it out.
Okay, let's go. 1941 to 1945, The Rise of Japanese Empire, episode 0.3.
It is July 30th, 1912. Emperor Meiji is dead, his family is mourning him, and his heir is preparing to ascend to the chrysanthemum throne as Emperor Taisho. For the past 4 decades, Meiji had overseen the modernization and industrialization of the Japanese Empire, which underwent an extensive political, economic, and social revolution. At his funeral, a massive procession gathered to pay homage to the emperor that had brought a new era for Japan. Of this event, the New York Times wrote that the contrast between that which preceded the funeral car and that which followed it was striking indeed. Before it went Old Japan, after it came New Japan. And in this New Japan, many differences could already be noticed, such as a great economic growth in many sectors, aided by the financial power of the Zaibetsu business conglomerates and by the introduction of electric power. Heavy government investment in engineering, industry, and railway building that resulted in the rapid industrialization of Japan, the establishment of a Western-based education system, and the complete modernization of the army and navy.
Holy crap! First of all, I'm gonna stop right there. This is just very quick, but wow, Japan really modernized. I'm impressed. Oh my god.
Yet the death of Meiji would also spark a political crisis in the Japanese Empire, as the Meiji Constitution was written in such a way that the military had dominance over the civilian government. If the IJA or the IJN refused to appoint a minister for the new cabinet, then the cabinet wouldn't be formed and the government would be interrupted. When this happened 2 times in 1912 and 1913, the acting prime ministers were forced to resign. In response, the public was outraged due to the military manipulation of the cabinet, and soon demands against the oligarchic system of the Japanese Empire began to emerge. But the political uprisings would have to temporarily take a break, as in Europe, the First World War broke out in 1914.
If you don't know what the oligarchy, it's like a hierarchy in Japan. That's what they call the hierarchy in Japan. So, yeah. This is okay. This is before World War One. I'm very, very sorry, but this is the start of World War One because it's 1914, and World War One ended in 1918. So I don't know what the exact date, but the year I know it's 1918. So looking at the countries in Europe in this time, Great Britain still has control over Ireland. Ottoman Empire is still there. Austro-Hungary is still there, and that's it. And Finland is not independent. Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine, and over here is Italy. Oh well, look, French West Africa. Oh my God. Anyway, okay.
Between the Central Powers and the Entente, as a consequence of the Anglo-Japanese Treaty, Japan entered the war on the side of the Entente, seizing the opportunity to expand its sphere of influence in China and the Pacific, where the German Empire had colonial possessions. While Australia and New Zealand launched invasions against German Samoa and German New Guinea, Vice Admiral Sadakichi Kato of the Second Fleet started the blockade of the German colony of Tsingtao, and Vice Admiral Yamaya Tanin of the South Seas Squadron started to pursue the fleeing German East Asia Squadron towards the Marshall Islands. Quickly, the IJN seized the Mariana, Caroline, Palau and Marshall Islands with virtually no resistance, and the IJA landed on Shandong to start the siege of Tsingtao. After 2 months, Tsingtao fell on November 7th, and the city was occupied by Japanese troops. The IJN would also continue to support naval operations in the Pacific against German raiders, and eventually it would even send squadrons into the Mediterranean to help the Entente in the region.
First of all, wow, that's the first time that I just learned about that, because I don't know how Japan earned the islands before the Pacific War. Wow. So they got it from World War I, and they were German territories. So yeah, I didn't know that. Wow.
During the war, Japan increasingly filled orders for needed war materials for its European allies. The wartime boom helped to diversify the country's industry, increase its exports, and transform Japan from a debtor to a creditor nation for the first time. Although this industrial boom also led to a rapid inflation and the outbreak of rice riots throughout Japan. Meanwhile, in China, the empire attempted to consolidate its position in the region by presenting the 21 demands to Chinese President Yuan Shikai in 1915. These demands essentially transformed China into a Japanese protectorate, and in response, the Japanese earned the international condemnations of their allies, particularly from the United States. In the end, Japan withdrew the demands, but it would continue to extend its influence in China via more subtle means. The fall of the Russian Empire in 1917 also saw the Japanese wanting to increase their influence in the region with an intervention in Siberia, landing almost 70,000 men under the orders of General Otani Kikuzo and penetrating as far west as Lake Baikal. In 1919, as the British and American expeditionary forces withdrew, the Japanese decided to stay for 3 more years, with the objective of creating an anti-Bolshevik buffer state in Siberia, an enterprise that would fail, costing a lot of money for the empire. That same year, Japan's representative Saionji Kinmochi sat alongside the Big Four at the Paris Peace Conference.
Wow. This is, I don't know who these folks are, but I know who this is. This is Woodrow Wilson.
As a result of the peace treaties, the Japanese Empire gained a permanent seat on the Council of the League of Nations.
Oh, this is the Treaty of Versailles, yeah. Okay.
Annexed the German leased territories in Shandong, and was granted the South Seas Mandate over the Pacific Islands they had occupied.
So, in the Treaty of Versailles, Japan got some German territories. And to be honest with you, Japanese influence in China is getting out of hand. And oh look, Tibet is still there. And they're using World War I to insert their dominance towards the Republic of China. And that could lead to, we all know, World War II.
After the war ended, the Japanese Empire emerged as a naval powerhouse, having the 3rd largest navy in the world, and learning important anti-submarine warfare techniques and technologies that contributed to future Japanese submarine developments.
Wow.
Back home, the political strife ended with the adoption of a 2-party political system known as the Taisho democracy. But the failure of the Siberian intervention and the termination of the Anglo-Japanese treaty would leave Japan alone and weakened, forcing the empire to adopt a more neutral attitude towards China and to sign the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922 and the subsequent London Naval Treaty of 1930 that established an international capital ship ratio, limited the size and armaments of capital ships, and forced Japan to return the leased territories in Shandong. Furthermore, the national debt started to grow again because of the renewed export competition. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923 devastated the capital. A communist party dangerous to the current regime was founded, and the rise of the tenant farmer movement led to the outbreak of social unrest.
Okay, this is ads.
What makes Starborn the greatest game you've never heard of? Well, to begin with, It's basically civilization in space, but with thousands.
Wow. Okay. This is before Japan starting to get more into expansion. Wow, that's a lot of problems. National debt, the Great Kanto earthquake, Japan Communist Party, tenant farmer movement. Yeah, that's a lot of problem for the Taisho period. God damn.
Although the communists and the tenants were brutally repressed, thus ending the threats they posed, economic and political pressures forced the government to enact the Peace Preservation Law of 1925 that essentially criminalized socialism, communism, republicanism, and democracy.
Whoa.
This was the end of the Taisho democracy, with Emperor Taisho dying himself the next year. Upon the death of his father, Prince Hirohito ascended to the chrysanthemum throne on December 25, 1926.
And this is the guy that appointed Hideki Tojo to be Prime Minister of Japan. Okay. Hello, Mr. Hirohito.
Hirohito would have a rough start as emperor, with the outbreak of the Showa financial crisis in the first year of his rule. Many businesses went bankrupt, exports decreased, silk and rice prices plummeted, and unemployment skyrocketed.
It's like the Great Depression. I'm just saying, it's like the Great Depression. For me, yes, it's like the Great Depression. I know, I said the Great Depression 3 times, but hey, I'm just trying to compare it.
The situation worsened with the Great Depression of 1929, but Japan's finance minister, Takahashi Korekiyo, would start working to devalue the currency and to provide economic relief, measures that would be very successful. The 4 major zaibatsu also managed to avoid great losses in the panic, leading to their domination over every field of Japanese industry in the following years. In the countryside, the establishment of Nihon Shugi organizations led to the emergence of emperor-centered ultranationalism and Japanese fascism. The Nihon Shugi won increasing support because they offered solutions to the economic problems of the rural countryside. It was their practical program of cooperatives and credit associations, not their ideology, that accounted for their growing popularity and local influence. This new Japanese nationalism leaned on the Bushido moral code and the idea of racial superiority over other Asian nations. It was aimed against Western criticism and restrictions on Japanese immigration. In the military itself, an ultranationalist faction, known as the Kodoha, was formed by General Sadao Araki, seeking to purge the corruption in the government.
Oh, the Kodoha. Oh my god. Did the Kodoha got... No. This Sadao Araki, I don't know if I'm correct, or correct me if I'm wrong. After Sadao Araki was killed by an officer, a young officer, and then the person that was appointed to be the leader of the Kodoha was Hideki Tojo. Correct me if I'm wrong.
By establishing a militaristic administration run by Emperor Hirohito himself. Moreover, the Kodoha disliked modernization and the economic control of the zaibatsu, and also wanted to crush communism once and for all by attacking the Soviet Union and expanding into Siberia. Opposed to them was the more moderate Toseha.
Okay, for my learning about Kodoha, they're the most violent group in Japan in this time, because they have a lot of dislikes, and they oppressed everything by using violence, and that's the reason why Hideki Tojo liked the Kodoha, if I'm right. Okay.
Faction, which was also right-wing, but acknowledged that the IJA needed the support of the zaibatsu and the continuation of a modernization process to wage global war.
Oh.
Meanwhile, in Manchuria, the Kwantung Army had been established back in 1919 to defend the Liaodong Peninsula and the South Manchurian Railway. In the following decade, this army would become a stronghold for the Kodaha, advocating for a more aggressive expansionist policy in mainland Asia, and going so far as to plot the assassination of the Manchurian warlord Jiang Zuolin. In 1931, seeking the perfect excuse to expand into the rich region of Manchuria, the Kwantung leaders purposely sabotaged the Japanese-controlled railway to blame the Chinese garrison nearby and thus start a conflict in the region.
This is kinda looks like the explosion of a train that oversimplified mentioned in his World War II video. I want to look at that, but first I'm gonna learn about this, the rise of ultranationalism in Japan. So yeah, I don't know when. I don't want to react to oversimplified tomorrow or the next day because it's, I don't know, it's copying, and oversimplified copyrights the video. So yeah.
On September 18th, the plan of the Kwantung Army was executed, and the Mukden incident soon sparked a full-blown Japanese invasion of Manchuria. Soon, every city along the South Manchurian Railway fell into Japanese hands, and by October, the Kwantung Army had occupied the Jilin, Taonan, Yanbian, and eastern Liaoning areas. Although initially shocked by the insubordination, the government was now impressed by the quick victories in Manchuria and were starting to send reinforcements on their way. In the following months, the Zhengqiao and Jinzhou campaigns secured the western Liaoning and Qiqihar areas, and the fall of Harbin finally destroyed the remaining resistance in the region. With Manchuria firmly under Japanese control, the Kwantung Army established the Manchukuo puppet state and started a pacification campaign that allowed them to control the political administration of this new state. Despite its insubordination, the Kwantung Army would be rewarded for its great success, establishing a new era of Gekukujo inside the IJA. In response to the Western condemnation of the Japanese aggression, the League of Nations ordered the Lytton Commission to investigate the incident.
Oh, so because of that, Japan leaves the League of Nations. Oh, okay.
Which prompted Japan to exit the League of Nations, a decision that was influenced by the military and the nationalists. By 1933, Takahashi's policies had managed to bring Japan to an economic recovery. But the next year, the finance minister reduced military spending to avoid inflation, which resulted in a strong negative response from the strong militaristic fascism that was rising in Japan.
Correct me if I'm wrong again. Led by Hideki Tojo, right? Correct me if I'm wrong.
As the military's dominance over the government continued to grow after the May 15th incident, the country saw the emergence of right-wing admirals that wanted unlimited naval growth, and the empire started to dream about a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. From 1933 to 1936, the Japanese would use proxy armies in Inner Mongolia with the objective of creating a Mongolian buffer state next to Manchukuo. The successes in the provinces of Jehol and Chahar allowed for the establishment of the Inner Mongolian Autonomous Government, a Japanese puppet state under the rule of Prince Demchok Dongrab. Since 1934, the retirement of General Araki led to the decline in influence of the Kodaha faction, culminating in the February 26th incident of 1936, an attempted coup d'etat by Kodaha followers. The coup resulted in the death of several government members and Toseha followers, including Minister Takahashi and General Jotaro Watanabe. Yet Hirohito opposed the coup, and the uprising was crushed after 2 days. The following months saw the purging of the Kodaha, the abandonment of the London Naval Treaty, and a rise of tensions with China that would inevitably lead to war.
This was the Second Sino-Japanese War that started in 1937. this was the year or the war that I mentioned last video that started World War II. That I'm correct. I'm learning. I am a smartass now. My history knowledge is still inefficient. Okay, I'm sorry.
Next week, our coverage of the prelude to the Pacific War will continue. We're going to turn to the other side of the Pacific and look at the United States, its objectives in East Asia, and the consequences of World War I. Unfortunately, not every event and fun detail can be told in a 20-minute video, and in order to alleviate that, we decided to create a new podcast that will cover the events of the Pacific War every Tuesday for 4 years to accompany these videos. You can find these 1-hour episodes with interesting additions in the description and pinned comment. Consider following and leaving a review, it helps immensely. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons.
Okay. That was the rise of ultranationalism in Japan. Wow. It's amazing. That was episode 0.3 of the Pacific War, and I'm kind of interested in their podcast. I want to listen. I'm not gonna film it. I'm just going to listen because I love learning about the Pacific War. It's very, very unique, and I'm kind of biased because the Philippines is involved in the Pacific War, even though Pacific War is just inside of World War II. So yeah, thank you for watching, everybody. Like and subscribe for more videos like this, and tell me more about ultranationalism. And yeah, I'm gonna search up some World War I videos, and last video I saw a comment to check out the Great War channel, because the person that commented, he says the Great War channel has the best World War I videos in YouTube. I'm gonna look that up. So yeah, thank you for watching, everybody. Like and subscribe. I know I said it again, but hey, goodbye.